Hello and welcome back to Identity Architects, the podcast that spotlights pioneers in our industry who are changing the way that data is used to power better customer experiences. I'm your host Ben Cicchetti, and for this episode we're heading down under for our first ever Australian episode of Identity Architects. Our General Manager for Australia and New Zealand, Richard Knott, sat down with Troy Townsend, co-founder and CEO at Zitcha. Richard and Troy not only discuss one of the hottest topics in the media industry in 2023, retail media, but they also touch on the power of content, the rise of first-party data, the use of data clean rooms, and much, much more. Before we jump into that conversation, just a reminder to hit that subscribe button so you know when the latest episodes of Identity Architects land. But without any further delay, here's Richard's chat with Troy.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to what is a very special episode of Identity Architects. It is our first ever episode from Down Under, recorded here in Sydney, Australia. My name is Richard Knott. I am InfoSum's General Manager for Australia and New Zealand. And with me today for this auspicious occasion is an Australian industry legend, Troy Townsend. Troy is well known in Australia as a leader in marketing innovation, and none more so than what he's doing with his current company, Zitcha. Welcome, Troy.
Hi Richard, great to be here.
Great to have you here. So to dive in straight into it, let's start with an opening question just to cover off some of the basics around yourself and around your business. For anyone who doesn't know you, can you please give us a quick intro to Troy Townsend and to Zitcha and what you and what Zitcha is and what your role is within Zitcha?
Yes, so I'm the co-founder and CEO of Zitcha. I've been in the digital ad tech space for close to 20 years now, so I feel like I'm hearing the words industry veteran doesn't really rub up right, but I've been in the space for a while. Well, I'll take legend. But Zitcha is a platform that basically helps any retailer build a retail media network. I spent the last 12 years of my life building an ad tech platform on top of Facebook from the very early days of them starting to build an ad product all the way to about 2 years ago, where I exited a business called Tiger Pistol. And off the back of that business, I started my journey into retail media. Could see a lot of writing on the wall around privacy legislation and things happening in the space, in the ad tech space. And retail media became a real focus of mine. And Zitcha is really built to make it really easy for retailers to stand up a retail media network and grow across their own native assets to their offsite assets like Google and Meta and TikTok, and their in-store assets like their screens and their audio and their end caps and the likes of that. So it's a pretty exciting space.
Oh yeah, fantastic. It's definitely a growing space, something with a lot of opportunity and very exciting. And before we get into the meat and gravy of that, to get things warmed up, let's do a few quick fire questions just to warm things up. What is your earliest memory of advertising?
I think my earliest memory in Australia, there was some. I was probably about 6 or 7. There was some pretty hard hitting ads on the TV around that. It's a business that basically tries to stop people drinking and driving, and it's called the TAC. And there's some really hard hitting ads that hit the screens in the late 80s. And I think if I think about that question, there's some they were probably my earliest thoughts of advertising and what Adland were creating that sort of made an impact that I still remember today, which is 30 odd years later.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. And what was your first job in either advertising or marketing?
So out of uni, I got a job in London. Actually, is where I started my ad career in a through the line agency called DDA. So we worked on clients like Emirates Airlines, Malaysia Airlines. We had a lot of airline clients, but it gave me my first foot in the door in London, and had a few good years over there working in that space, and then sort of moved from there into over into the US and the Canadian market before I came back and actually started back here in Australia.
Knowing what you know now, what would you say to yourself when you started your career?
Um, I would say to myself, start a little business called Google and get into search is probably what I'd tell myself if I had my time again. But I think really be open to massive change in a space that is moving so quickly, and sort of make sure you sort of take in all the opportunities that you're going to get. You know, I look at the space from when I started, everything was in flyers and very, very traditional TV and sort of below the line attributes to now sort of where the digital ecosystem is in the landscape. So I'd be sort of very focused on keeping your eyes open for opportunity and taking all the things that advertising throws at you.
Nice. And what do you love about what you're doing right now and the industry that you're in?
I love how, like anything in the digital space, I love how quick it moves. I think to be really specific to the things I'm doing today is it's a little bit. It feels like a little bit of the changing of the guard in ad tech. Privacy being such a really core part of how we're doing our day to day, and I feel like it's such a new space, but it's a replication of an old space. And seeing where things like AI, where things like data and one PD is going to take us, it's super exciting. It's one of those points in time that is going to be a real inflection point into the way the space will be for the next 10 to 15 years. I think so. Um,
Yeah.
you know, and it's just everyone from different parts of the industry is actually coming together to solve the problem. So I think it's super exciting space.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And we're obsessed with this thing called identity.
Yes.
How would you explain identity to a 10-year-old in the advertising and marketing context?
Well, I mean, to a 10-year-old, I would say identity is your digital footprint. It's the fingerprint that you have across everything you do. I think that's one thing that I try and tell my kids is that everything you do leaves a fingerprint of the next thing that you will do, and um, having yourself. All put together in one spot where people can actually start to really understand what you do, what you like, and what you don't like, is something that I would get really clear on with my 10-year-old around what their identity is across the open web and what they do across everything, not just in the open web, but actually in sort of transactions in store or what they buy in different games. So everything leaves a fingerprint for their individual identity on what they like and what they don't like.
Yeah, no, that's great. And what keeps you awake at night?
Oh, there's a lot of things that keep me awake at night, Richard. I think that I either lie awake with excitement on where this space is moving, and where different clients are thinking about how they're thinking about evolving the space. That keeps me awake. And then on the flip side, I'm in a 2.5-year-old startup, so I stay awake on all the critical things that building a business and building a team, keeps you thinking and wanting to do better and do more and be on top of everything, whether it be cash, whether it be new clients, whether it be innovating, as quickly as we can. So I have a laundry list of things. My wife also getting me to do all the things around the house keeps me awake at night as well, mate. So there's a lot of things, but I think most likely the biggest one is just how this space is evolving so quickly, and how our business really stays at the bleeding edge of what we're doing and how we're doing it.
I suppose that probably leads a little bit on to my next question, which is what inspires you? Because I'm sure it's probably something sort of on the flip side of that, really.
I mean, there's so many. Again, I don't have a single thing. I get inspired by my team every day. I think watching people ask really, really deep questions around the why they're doing this, why they need to do this better. I think that's a major driver for me. I think there's nothing better than seeing big problems solved, even if it's bit by bit, but really staying focused on some really hard things. And when I look internally at my team, I see that stuff happen every day. And then when I look at my family, I think is another big one. My wife's in a startup as well. She's doing some amazing things, and my kids are learning off it, even though they're sort of all under the age of 10. They're all starting to sort of look at what their parents are doing and sort of starting to do their own little things on the side. So I think
Yeah.
that stuff drives my inspiration.
Oh, definitely. That's fantastic. And finally, if there was a song that was a soundtrack to your life, what would it be?
Yeah, this one's so. I think the first song that came to my mind with this question was "Tub Thumping" by Chumbawamba. I don't know why that was the first one that came to mind, but I think I've been through a couple of startups, and it's obviously not a linear line to success. It's always you're working through the process of trying new things working, things not working, but it's a consistency of getting up and continuing to push. And I probably could write that for the last 20 years of my career in the things that I've done to try and sort of to try and drive value and quality. So that's the song that I'm going to stick with, Richard.
No, fair enough. And I presume you mean the get knocked down, get up again part, rather than the mixing of the lager and the vodka and the
Yeah,
drinks.
well, maybe it's a little bit of both, to be honest. So
Fair
yeah,
enough.
yeah.
All right, great. Well, thank you for that. So now we can sort of get a little bit more, I think, into the meat of the conversation. Let's start with a question around data and how that integral that is as part of a marketing strategy. Everyone wants to build out their first party data solutions, but that's easier said than done. How do brands, specifically retail brands and retailers, go about collecting first party data today?
Mm. I think this is a great question. I think a lot of brands. I mean, to preface, I think a lot of brands are not doing a great job when it comes to collecting first-party data. Um, not only do I think that there's a long way to go in this space, but I think they're not really clear on how to do it. If I look at a brand that I think is doing probably a world-class job in collecting data, it'd probably be Red Bull.
Right.
Just in how strong they are around number one, their depth of content, the ability for them to really create a brand that people want to give their data for, and they're creating value in the space of they're a typical consumer brand, but they've done an amazing job of being able to connect the dots of what their customers want, what they like to see, how they like to interact outside of just the purchase journey. Um, and I think when I look at the plethora of brands that we work with, I think a lot of them are really trying to set the structure of what they do and how they do it. Number one is how are they actually collecting data? Do they have a direct to consumer offering? What are the critical steps of them actually being able to collect data on their side? And how are they adding value to that customer journey by being able to collect that data on their side? So I think from that perspective, there's some really critical points around the things that they need to do. Content is for me a big one. I think brands that can create really enticing and engaging content is a massive driver of value back to their end customers. Number two is like, right, what are they doing around loyalty? What are they doing around that purchase decision? So being able to collect that one PD is super critical there. So what are they doing with retail partners? What are they doing direct? And then being able to, like, the third bucket is probably how do they map all that to be able to collect it and then use it? Because I think that's the other thing is Some brands get really focused on the collection piece, but they
Yeah.
actually don't know how to use that data properly. And I think, when you get into that depth of the value of that data, and being able to use that for action, and that action then drives incremental data and drives incremental revenue, I think is the critical thing for brands to be focused on. But I think it's definitely something a lot of brands are asking the question of, is like, right, how do I collect? Number one, how do I collect it?
Yeah.
Number two, once it's collected, how do I use it in order to drive incremental value back into the brand? So I think Red Bull, from that perspective, I feel like they'll engage, they'll collect their data, they'll collect it at every different point, whether it's running events, whether it's um, their sponsorships that they have within F1 or any other sponsorships they have. They're collecting that data really well, and then they're segmenting it really well in order to direct their customers to the right product they have in order to get that incremental revenue. So I think for me they're the three big buckets.
No, great. Yeah, and obviously coming into that, particularly in Australia now, but obviously it has been in Europe already, and it's coming into the US as well. Is this privacy angle and this privacy consideration and the management of consent, and obviously that comes in to the usage. How do you maintain that privacy, that security, that consent, but still having the utility and that you want to drive from collecting it in the first place? That's obviously a big challenge for people to get
Absolutely.
that balance.
Definitely, and I don't think it's a really simple thing for a lot of marketers to really understand that. Like there's quite a lot of understanding that a marketer needs to have in order to comply with the privacy standards, to comply with all the structure of what's the stack that I need to use in order to be able to get that data, and how do I make sure that data is compliant with everything that I do. So I think it's a bit of a learning curve for a lot of marketers. Especially as the space is so dynamic as well. It's changing so much. We've got new privacy legislation on the table here in Australia, for example, that's starting to follow on, maybe even more in depth than we have, like with GDPR in Europe and the UK as well. So these things are a moving feast for a lot of marketers that are trying to be compliant, but also having to learn the rules as the game goes on.
Yeah, yeah. There used to be the days when marketers used to have to understand just marketing, and then it has become wise in tech, and now they're having to become wise in legal and
Totally,
regulations
exactly,
and things. So
exactly right.
it's definitely a role that's broadening out. And so, what innovations are you seeing in your day to day role around the use of first party data? What technologies are you emerging that excite you, and what's still missing? How are you seeing the landscape evolve?
Yeah, I mean, the way sort of the things that I'm seeing in the market is, obviously the rise of CDPs is a big one. The use of CDP and how that really adds value back into the, whether it be the retailer mix or the brand mix. So I'm loving the work that CDP has been doing. For us, where it gets really interesting is like, what are the data points that we're not collecting? I think it's really simple to see. We're collecting a lot of 1PD when it comes to transaction, right? So we're collecting, our typical, we know within the loyalty structure what we need to collect. We know transaction collection. We know a bunch of stuff at that point of purchase. Where I'm getting really interested is like what's happening in the periphery of a store environment, for example. So one platform that I'm loving at the moment is Black.ai. They're basically, an AI layer on top of cameras to be able to track people around store, even though it's all anonymized based on the movement, but they're starting to track data around, like, right, how do we flow through a store? What are the things that we do? Where do we stop? Where don't we stop? So from our perspective around the in-store environment is still a really unanswered. When it comes to marketing, it's like, right, what attribution does seeing something in the physical mean? We're tracking everything really well in the digital, and we know, we've got our digital footprint, fingerprint. We're running across any digital surface, but as it goes into the physical, things start to get a bit more blurred. So starting to love some work that's going on in that space, and for us specifically, we're looking through how do we close the loop on attribution from from on-site into in-store, and what are the things that we can layer into that, whether it's screens or whether it's audio. What are the things that are actually going to get that consumer to actually to be able to move and track that to attribution. So I think there's some really really exciting stuff happening in that space, and it's something that we're also very very focused on unearthing to sort of connect the dots across all three of those critical buckets, whether it be on-site, off-site, and in that in-store environment.
Yeah, nice. Definitely a lot of developments in that space and in this space overall. And we touched on it a little bit earlier. You've got to, it's one thing to collect data, it's one thing to be able to utilize it, and then there's another thing to be able to do that in a privacy compliant or a privacy first manner. What are some of the best practices you're seeing for brands when starting to use their first party data? Is there any advice that you can share about how a brand who maybe has started to collect data through different methods, how can they start approaching how they're going to use it?
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to the utilization of their 1PD is like the first question is, what's the outcome that they're trying to achieve? I mean, to bring to look at retail media and then look at a retailer and the data that they bring to the table, and then look at the data that the brand are bringing to the table, and how do they, as a brand, what do I do in order to add value to the data that I've collected here, and also connect that into the retailer's environment. So I think and talking to the partnership that we have at InfoSum around clean rooms, I think clean rooms is such an amazing opportunity for brands to be able to add value on top of the data set that they're collecting from a retailer's perspective. And I think we're starting to see this growth in where a retailer not only want to help a brand sort of connect across the retailer's assets, but also how does the data that the retailer has help the brand connect across their assets? So I
Yep.
think we're going to start to see a massive shift, or not a shift, but a growth trajectory in being able to run across a retail, but also run across the brand. So I think the use of clean rooms and how that value adds into the brand and to the retailer. To be honest, I think it adds value on both sides, but definitely from a brand perspective, the utilization of that. Then I think just getting really clear on the outputs of what they're going to do, or understanding if you're sitting on a lot of 1PD as a brand, like how does that segment? How do I break that segment into the messaging that I want to have across my audience? Who is my audience to sort of be able to create those messages and get really clear on what sort of marketing flows you want to put in place on that side. And I think at the end of the day, we're all sort of trying to push the right message to the right audience at the right time. And as a brand, I think getting really clear on what those messages are, what those cohorts or segments of audiences are, and how best that serves the outcome of the brand is a critical piece as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, it's that sort of thing, hit the nail on the head there. Really, the collaboration is the key piece, because that's where the real value unlock is. And as you say, that's what data clean rooms enable. Not just of the first party data, but also second party data as well. Which partner brands and which partner, where there's no commercial transaction or anything like in third party data, but where you can collaborate with like-minded businesses to understand more about the consumer journey is a huge unlock. But yeah,
Totally.
if you just got to start with that first-party data collection, as you say, do that properly, and
Right.
then
I think
you
I
can
think
run.
it's like this space can get, people can run down rabbit holes pretty quickly, but I think the simplicity of just taking it the first step at a time for every brand to be able to do that. But I think if you look at it as a brand or as a retailer, you know, there's no doubt that when I look at it from a retailer perspective, when it comes to the 1PD they're sitting on, is it's just so deep in the ability for them to get really, really honed on how they segment. They understand their customers in depth, and I think with retail media coming to the forefront, is that those segments are going to drive incremental value. The more granular they get and the more specific they get around their audience structures, the more value that they can create to their brands who are buying those audiences, but also the more value they create from a revenue perspective for those audiences. So I think we're going to start to see that connection get a hell of a lot deeper over the coming years, where retailers are really getting specific on the golden goose that they're sitting on, which is their data asset, and how they can utilize that. And then obviously on the flip side for that, for brands to be able to, number one, use that, but also to your point around first and second party, to be able to then get their data asset looking as strong as possible on their side as well. So I think the value creation on both sides will drive much more granular targeting and much more granular expectations around how they can segment and get the value for each part of their audiences on
Yeah,
each
yeah.
side.
Yeah, it's hugely exciting space. We just really got to get started, move away from cookies, and just get started on this. So, double clicking down onto an area very close to your heart, retail media. It's one of the hottest topics in the industry at the moment. We're often being called the third wave of digital advertising. How will we know when we've hit the inflection point with it? What will that look like, and when do you think we will arrive?
It's a great question. A question I wish I knew the exact answer to, Rich, to be honest. I think we're in the infancy of this space. I think what you're seeing is the category is driving off the back of a few really large retailers, typically run by grocery. You see, Amazon is obviously sitting at the top of the tree from a growth and the size of their RMN, but you're seeing the Walmarts, the Krogers, the Albertsons in the US. Here in Australia, you've got the Cartologies and the Coles 360s. New Zealand, you've got the Warehouse Group. You've got the larger retailers really driving the category. But where I see sort of the inflection point happening is where you start to get a lot of the tier two and tier three retailers also looking at driving growth through building an RMN. And when it gets to the point of aggregation being the key part of being able to buy across all of them. Currently, it's manageable, right? There's enough that you can manage. It's new for brands to be able to buy, but as that size of networks grow, you're going to start to see that aggregation will start to play a role in the space. So I think for me. As you start to see that aggregation start to hit where brands are like going, right, I don't want to just buy through a single retailer. I want to buy across all the retailers that I have. I think that's the point where we know that retail media has passed the inflection point it is in now into mainstream.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. When it starts becoming more like a network type solution
Mm.
rather than an individual shopping based solution. Um, so, if you imagine you're a retailer who, for whatever reason, you've had your head in the sand for a while on this, but now you think, right, I really need to get into retail media. If you could boil down to sort of two, three, or four, whatever key things that you need to do to get started, so that you can benefit from this and turn this hype into a reality, what would you recommend?
I think number one is understanding the opportunity. So, what have you got to sell as a retailer? So, a lot of retailers are still working through that piece. Is going right. I have quite a hefty data asset. I have surfaces like my website or my app. I have my external channels like a Meta, a Google, a TikTok, a Trade Desk. I have my in-store assets. What is all that worth as a starting point? Now, to understand the opportunity then drives the right, what's the change management, which is the second piece of the puzzle, right? So going right, I want to create there's a 10 million or $100 million opportunity on the table as our retail media asset or the opportunity. Then it's like, right, how am I going to move to be able to do that? What are the things internally that I need to do in order to realize that? Now, typically, that's a internal people structure. So, do I want to have a media division? Does it sit within my merch teams? Like, who owns it within the org? And then, what's the stack that I need to deliver that? What are the things that I need in order to be able to make that a reality? Now, I think a lot of retailers are working through the process that they've had. Most large grocery or pharmacy retailers have had some form of retail media structure in their business for a long time. But it's moving it from catalog and print and very traditional metrics into digital. So how are they going to do that? What stack is in order? And I think there's a critical decision tree when it comes to the stack, because the amount of money and yield that a retailer makes is a very vital thing. There's an opportunity, the revenue that you can make at a top line, but then there's the bottom line focus of like what's the actual bottom line value to this. So getting really clear on the stack that you create in order to maximize your bottom line is another critical thing. The likes of a Zitcha and an InfoSum, and you sort of start to bring that stack together in order to maximize your yield rather than just throwing a whole heap of different players into the mix. And when you actually get to the bottom line, you're not making as much money as you thought. Top line's always great, and everyone, you know, gets really focused on the top line opportunity, but really the game is, as you start to see these networks roll out, it's like what's dropping down to the bottom. What are you actually making as a positive contribution to the bottom line over time? So the third bucket is the stack and what you do, and then probably the last piece is the sales piece. Who's going to sell it? Where does that sit again? If it's run within the marketing team or a media team, you're starting to see a lot of the large retailers create their own media divisions that have their own sales teams, or they're implementing sales teams from external vendors. I think that's another big critical piece to the success, is making sure that you think like a media business, because you're becoming one.
Yeah.
So the media sales component is another piece that you need to tick off.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Zitch is obviously seeing a lot of great success across a wide range of different retailers. Of the different types of retailers you're working with, what are some of the common challenges or some of the common hurdles that you're seeing across that whole area?
I think it's just, I think the big one is that you're bringing in multiple parts of a business. It doesn't sit in one part. You're bringing data into the business. You're bringing different e-com or different parts of the business that's selling different media. So I think the biggest thing for most retailers as a starting point is like, right, where does this actually sit, and how do I get multiple people on board to understand what we're trying to do to create a single view of value within building a retail media network? And I think that's common. That's a common thread across every retailer. And then on the flip side of that is probably the metrics on the other side, right? So if I'm going to go and sell my media, how do I make sure that I'm setting the expectation of value to my suppliers and to my brands, right? So, because at the end of the day, a successful RMN is built off the fact that brands can come in, buy the media, and get the return that they're looking for as well. So I think a lot of retailers are working through this process um, of making sure that they're giving enough data back to their brands in order to show value to keep growing the network. But they're sort of still working through what are the pieces of that puzzle that they need to share. And I think that's just purely based on how new this space is. Retailers are great at retailing. This is a new muscle that they're starting to build and create internally within their businesses. So, they're hiring people from media businesses. They're bringing people in that understand this space. So I think what we're going to start to see is retailers start to get very good at this. But I think at the moment there's still a lot of questions unanswered that they're sort of working through, and they're creating their networks with best case in mind, but also sort of working through some change management that happens within the network or within their environment to make sure that the connection between their brands is driving maximum value, right? Because I think at the end of the day, even though it's a big opportunity from a revenue perspective, they've still got direct relationships with these brands, so they want to show value, and they're not just trying to sell for the sake of driving revenue. So I think
Yeah.
they're probably the main ones that sit across every retailer that we talk to in every market.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, and it links back a little bit to what you were saying about the change of the marketer's role. Everyone seems to have to be broadening their skill sets or verticalizing or whatever into different areas. So whether it's
Yeah.
marketers having to be able to be legal experts and be tech experts, or whether it's retailers now having to be media experts and managing data, it's just everybody has to sort of broaden their scope. It's a very interesting sort of way the business in general is shifting.
Yeah, so I mean, so think about marketers like the CMO role has always been seen as a cost center, right? Now
Yeah.
it's a profit center, right? So this expectation that a marketer is, has always just spent the money now is very much that the head of marketing is now the one that's bringing the profit into the business, right? So it's a big shift in the dynamic of the C level in a lot of these retailers as well, right? When someone is in charge of a large profit center, everyone wants a piece of that. So I think it's sort of working through those things. But I think going back to the things that get me really excited, it's a really exciting time for marketing that's sitting within these big retail organizations to be able to show a very, very decent bottom line contribution to the overall P&L. And I think that's a big shift for a lot of these retailers to undertake. So, it's going to be a very exciting couple of years as this space really evolves.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And whilst we've discussed a lot about the opportunity and a lot of the growth, what are some of the challenges, though, that you're seeing more at an industry level as a result of all of these changes, whether it's changes in roles, whether it's changes in legislation, just this constant change? What would your prediction be of the future of retail media, data collaboration, privacy? If you can try and encapsulate that into some kind of holistic sort of viewpoint, where's the industry going? Where's it going to be in 5 to 10 years in that data, retail media, and privacy space?
I think the big thing is around standardization. So currently, you have every retailer creating their own standards, their own set of standards around measurement, how they structure their networks. I think we'll start to see standardization across the industry. I think the IAB is starting to bring that structure in now, but I think from a brand perspective, they want to know when they're coming into one or two or 10 retailers that what they're buying is structured and standard across all. Now, that doesn't currently exist in the market. And I think there's going to be a lot of players that are starting to push that from a retail perspective, but also, for brands to be able to continue to spend and understand when they're spending across multiple retailers, that they can compare apples with apples and not apples with oranges, which I think is a little bit of the position now, and that's just based on where the market's at and where the space is at. So I think for me, over the next 5 years, you're going to start to see a lot more standardization. You're going to start to get really clear on the value metrics that you'll see as a brand and as a retailer, and I think you'll start to see um, levels of competition start to come into the market as well, right? Where CPMs might be a bit more consistent over them being so different across different retailers. And I think you're also going to start to see some major players in the offsite ecosystem start to add a lot of value into the retail dynamic as well. So I think a lot as to where the space is at the moment. I mean, the pandemic happened. A lot of people started to get really, really focused on following Amazon's footprint into ecom. Super interesting looking at, working in a smaller market like Australia and New Zealand, where Amazon isn't as strong as it is in markets like the US and Europe. And retailers are looking at their RMN from a breadth perspective. How do they make money in ecom, but also how do they make money across what they're spending in OPEX on driving acquisition into store through a Google or through a Meta, for example, or in the in-store environment. So I think those players are going to add some real value. It's going to be really exciting to see your traditional media platforms come into this space help retailers and help brands really utilize the amount of data that's sitting on their side to be able to maximize the size and the opportunity that these retailers are sitting on top of.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely spot on. Well, we've had a pretty thorough discussion around data and retail media here. Is there any sort of glaring things that maybe we haven't covered that you'd like to mention? Is there anything you'd like to sort of bring up as a sort of a closing comment around this?
I think depending on the listeners, I think if you're a brand and you haven't tried it, I think it's an amazing space to dip your toes into to really see the value it returns. I mean, pick a retailer that you feel comfortable with and try the space, and also as a retailer, there's no time like the present. Turning on a retail media network would be great if it could take a week, but it takes time, and sometimes that time you can sort of miss the boat. There's still a lot of first to market mover opportunities in every market. I think in every channel and category that retailers can stand up and sort of set something up. So I think on both sides. If you haven't done it, I think it's definitely something that you are going to do no matter what, even if you're trying to hide from it. It's definitely something that is coming, and it's the time is pressing to do it now, is what I would think. So that would be my closing comment on the space.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, it's a prescient time, I think, for a lot of things, whether it's data collaboration, whether it's privacy, whether it's retail media networks. This is the moment to really get moving on that stuff. So
Yeah.
fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, Troy. It's been fantastic to have a chat to you. Troy Townsend is co-founder and CEO of Zitcha, a retail media network platform, originally based out of Australia, but now working globally around the world. I've been Richard Knott. I'm the general manager for Australia, New Zealand for InfoSum, and this has been Identity Architects.
Thanks again to Troy for joining us for our first ever Australian episode of Identity Architects. That was an awesome conversation, and the quote that will stick with me from Troy will be, "It's not a linear line to success." Also, as a content marketer myself, I loved Troy's focus on the power of content to drive better value exchange and drive richer first-party data. All that leaves for me to do is to remind you to hit that subscribe button so you know when the next episode of Identity Architects lands. But until then, thanks for listening.